fun. We get the lucky panel right before lunch, so I hope you can stick with it and we'll be interesting enough so you're not getting too hungry. But let me start. I'm Stacey Bishop. I'm a partner at Scale Venture Partners. We're a Silicon Valley-based firm, mostly invest in enterprise infrastructure companies. We actually have one company here, DocuSign, that we're invested in. We've been fortunate to invest in a number of what I'd call unicorns. We're in Box, ExactTarget, RingCentral, HubSpot, to name a few. So thrilled to be here. And let me introduce my great panelists. So let me start with Brynne. She's the CEO of Move Guides, which is a global relocation company. And she started the company in business school while she experienced the pain of moving from a number of countries while working in investment banking. So I love it when ideas come out of the pain points that people feel themselves. Jesper's VP at DocuSign. He's charged with expanding in Europe specifically, and DocuSign we're helping getting rid of those pesky little paper signatures that we're all tired of doing. So look forward to that. James is based here in Dublin right now, and James is with Slack, and he was lucky to be the 9th employee there, which was just 3 years ago, and now you have over 600. So incredible growth there. A lot of us use Slack in our business as enterprise communication platform. So let me kick it off. One of the things is how the rise to become the unicorn or Soonicorn, as this panel is called, is not easy. So what do you think is the most important factor for growth? To be able to get to that place.
I could kick off. I think from my experience, it's absolutely the people that you hire, starting with the executive level, but then all the way down to every single person that's showing up every day and moving the company forward. You really have to have people that believe in the vision and are ready to put in the time to make that vision a reality. And probably the most important learning for me is that they are also at the right life and career stage to really be with the company for really a minimum of 24 months to make an impact on delivering that vision.
Yeah, so one of the things we heard earlier today as well is it's hard to start a business, so you may as well start it in a large market with sort of billion-dollar or multi-billion-dollar potential. And certainly to us at DocuSign, that was one of the first tick boxes when they started the company, basically saying, is there enough run rate ahead of us here to go build a unicorn and beyond? So that's certainly one thing. And then the other thing we consistently find is that you want to attract a certain type of individuals, right? There are people who will do really well having great careers in Oracle or SAP or Microsoft, and then they come into our environment and they just hate it and they fail. So I think there is definitely a cultural element of who you attract and who you bring into the organization. And our experiences, my experience is you can only grow businesses to the sort of unicorn scale and beyond if you get that right DNA, and they can be hard to find and tell the good sort of big company executive apart from someone who will thrive in this environment.
I think for us, people who've done messaging applications before Slack, and there was certainly the right momentum behind messaging at the right time. So I think market timing was a big part of our success. People certainly were a big part of our success because people, I think, lead to the second big factor, which is execution. So our ability to build something that was different and retained people and got people interested was certainly integral to it. And it was, I don't mean to say like when we were in early days and trying to figure something out that we were like, we got this nailed. Because we did this preview release on August 12th, 2013, and we didn't really know what was going to happen. And we did some press around it, and 8,000 people signed up in the first 24 hours, and then 16,000 signed up by the end of that week. And at that stage, we were like, we've done something, like we were surprised by it too. Yeah. So looking back, you can make a narrative around it, but I think at the time, you're surprised by all the success. So it certainly wasn't like we were going to be this billion-dollar company at that stage. We knew that we wanted to do a big thing, but we wanted to just execute on the thing in front of us first.
Got it. So Brynne, you mentioned this culture. So it's such an important thing in terms of, how do you make it expand beyond the 100 employees? Because at 100 employees, you can kind of know everyone, you can have some control over hiring, but how do you get it so it continues on?
Yeah, it's a great question and a very big topic, and we're going through a lot of that right now. So we're just broaching upon about 150 employees. So over the last few months, we've gone through the phase of kind of graduating, I guess, from the less than 100 to the more than 100, which I think is a very significant inflection point in a company. At Move Guides, that's compounded by our geographic distribution. So our team's spread across London, San Francisco, and Hong Kong, and we have been pretty much since the first year by virtue of the industry that we serve. So it's even more difficult to build the culture and then ensure that it's consistent across people and locations. And the way that we've approached it is, firstly, we defined the values of the company very, very early. It was one of the first things that I did, and they're still the same today, although they do evolve a little bit at particular points. And we make them a core part of our dialogue. We start all of our town halls with them. We do an induction with everyone. And I personally make sure that my staff is really aligned with those values and then can translate them locally into their teams. And I think the second thing that we have done then is we talk a lot and very openly about what we call the employee value proposition. So what we will do for the employees, but what we expect them to do as well. And we actually exit people in many instances if they don't live up to their side of the bargain of that value proposition, and we talk about that pretty openly. So I think that the communication and the consistency of it and the consistency of the dialogue is extremely important, and then ensuring that your deputies and their deputies and their deputies continue that communication globally.
And at Slack, any particular notable things just growing that quickly from?
Well, we certainly wanted to, I think, like Brynne, codify what we stood for pretty early. So we also wanted to make it something that resonated and something that when people who had worked at the company heard like the values of the mission or something like that, they were like, oh, yeah, that's right. And it felt right. So our mission is to make your working life simpler, more pleasant, and more productive. It's kind of a simple thing to say, but it's also kind of a never-ending challenge. I think for us, though, part of it too is just like hiring great people and putting them in a position to succeed because, I think all of us could be an asshole in the wrong context. If you're stressed, if you're worked too hard, if you're not supported, all these things, right? So I think part of it is like the people. And in selecting people, we try and always select, first of all, for like trustworthiness and integrity. There's a great kind of Warren Buffett quote around like, if you don't select for trust first, you'll spend 30% of your time actually wondering if that person is trustworthy, if they're doing the job, all that kind of stuff. So you just take away that cognitive overhead, take that out of the equation. And then put them in a context that they can thrive in. And thriving is one of our 6 core values. So we have the expectation that you're going to come to Slack and you're going to do the best work of your career, and we're going to support you in doing that.
Got it. And recruiting, that's the tricky thing in all of this, growing to be a fast company, recruiting. What's your best, how do you make it happen? How do you hire so quickly to fill all the needs you have?
Well, as we talked in the prep, no comments. We're all competing for talent here. So,
the secret is.
Yeah. So certainly at DocuSign, one of the things we've done, we've grown the team here in Europe from about 10 people to 300 people in 3 years. And one of the early decisions we made was we're going to build our own in-house recruiting team. We are not going to rely on external vendors who has their own vested interest in placing people. So we will be as patient as required for some of these hard hires to go out and find the right people who match the DNA and so on. And again, if you got external providers helping you do that sometimes you have conflicting messages. So that's one thing. The other thing that we certainly encourage everybody at DocuSign to is help us do this. Make sure that we got great postings on Glassdoor. Make sure that all the good stuff that's happening inside the business, we share that on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter. So there's a lot everybody can do actually to help achieve this. And then the last thing is certainly all the way from the top. Our CEO is basically, it is his mantra that if we have a key hire or someone we have trouble getting over the line, or we're competing against another company out there, he's available to take a closing call with that person. And that basically sends a message down through the organization saying there's nothing more important actually, whether you're the CEO or the head of engineering or whatever. Getting the right people in the door is actually the number one job of every leader.
Right. Anything to add?
I would say it's actually the number one job of every single person in the company. So we went through a bit of an evolution in the early days where I think people perceived that it was management, if you want to call it that's job, to do the recruiting, and other people were writing code or other people were selling. And we talked a lot about it. I was like, I do not care if you are the best engineer, you are the best salesperson. It is equally your job to make sure that we are hiring people better than you and continuing to increase the bar of the company. I expect people to interview, I expect people to care, and we expect them to be a part of, most importantly, onboarding once we've found the people. Because that's the thing that I think also often gets overlooked. It's like we give more training in many instances as a society to a McDonald's person than we do to the people that we hire at our company. So we invested heavily, heavily, heavily in the post-recruiting cycle, pre-start, then flying people into London for their training period, bringing people from different parts of the organization into that onboarding process and making sure that everyone then did align with our values, understand the mission, and then was positioned to succeed when they started their roles.
Got it.
Yeah, for us, we definitely invested in recruiting. It's the kind of thing, like if you think about what you're going to invest in, you're going to always be recruiting people, particularly if you're a growth-oriented company. So if you get good at that, you get good at solving one of the biggest problems that you're going to have as a company, and it's always a challenge. The company is like Soylent Green, made of people.
Right.
So people is the thing that drives everything that we do. But I think, again, like working on your process is as important as finding the right candidates. We get about 8,000 inbound resumes a week. And so just being able to like sift through that and be able to be super focused on the kinds of people that will be successful is as important.
Got it. So another question, shifting gears, and I know both. Well, all you are now global companies. When is the time to start thinking globally? And we see this in the U.S., where companies can be very U.S.-centric for almost too long, and then they've got to start thinking about expanding globally. How important do you think that is in the early days of the company?
I think US-based companies have a huge advantage in the sense that they have the ability to target 300 million people, the world's largest economy, in a fairly homogeneous market, right? So you're able to go to market in a pretty quick way, but that also, I think in a way, distracts you from the larger world, but also sets an expectation that when you go to Europe, for example, there's 500 million people and that should be a bigger market, right? But actually it's about 30 different markets that combine. And so it's not as homogeneous. And so setting the expectation for the company is important. But for us, we had to really look at where, as much as anything, our customers pulled the model out of us to go international. So we had customers in Japan pretty quickly. We had customers in the UK pretty quickly. We had customers in Israel pretty quickly. So we needed to be able to support them and deliver the kind of product experience and support experience that we wanted to live up to. So we had to do that at that stage.
Right. And that brings up a good point. I mean, Jesper, you're charged with getting into Europe and, and that, the challenges that entails.
Yeah, so I think our story is slightly different in that what we do is basically we perform a legally binding signature. So we are actually, as we started to scale out, we remained in the US for a long time. We were 10 years old before we even moved to London. So again, as we scaled out, we looked at, there's basically common law and civil law countries, so let's go for the low-hanging fruit. The legal system in the UK and Australia is pretty similar to the US, so that was a natural first place to go. And then we've been very careful, actually, over the last 3 years of figuring out what do we do now, what is the sequencing into Europe. So we acquired 2 businesses the last year. We invested very heavily in getting accreditations and European data centers so that we can go to a German or a French or an Italian customer who has a different level of skepticism towards data privacy and so on. So for us, the international scaling, and still work in progress, is that we are now debating, now that we have the product, we made the acquisition, we have the infrastructure, where do we go next? So I think how you do this and the pace you do it at very much depends on whether you are a relatively generic service like collaboration, or whether you're something that is heavily influenced by local country legislation. So I think we're gonna wrestle with this issue for the next 5 years, because then what do we do in China? What do we do in Russia? What do we do in some of these harder places? So my lesson and our lesson at DocuSign is it depends greatly on what your unique circumstance. I'm sure in things like relocation, again, you touch HR and laws and regulations as well.
Yeah, we had a different experience, which I think is an interesting reflection of the fact that when you go global and how you do it, for me, is just very dependent on the company. There's no formula. I think sometimes we like to try to apply a formula in the startup or VC world, but the reality is there just isn't. So our experience is that MoveGuides is a global company, and it has been from day one. By definition, when you do global mobility, you have to operate in all 200 countries and territories in the world through your supply chain, your delivery model, your software, and your support model. Otherwise, no one who matters from the customer perspective will talk to you, because they care about your ability to operate globally. So from day one, we had to think about this, and we had to think about how we build a company, a product, processes, a team, and a culture at the same time between London, San Francisco, and to some extent Hong Kong, although that's a little bit smaller. And what we decided was that the key to it is three things, which I'll begin with a C, so we call it the 3 Cs. Communication, clarity, and culture. So the culture piece we already touched upon. The clarity piece is saying this to everyone that you recruit consistently in the organization, that we live above borders. I really don't care where people live, but I do expect them to travel. I do expect them to work global hours, and I do expect them to think at that level for internally and externally. And then communication is the other one. Again, I expect and I demand of my team, and I hire people who have the ability to over-communicate and the ability to collaborate globally and the ability to share information with people who are globally distributed around the world as the baseline. And so for us, those have been the keys to success about building a global company successfully from a very early stage.
Got it. So question for all of you. Is there ever a point where you've actually grown too fast and were, challenges you've, encountered by just hiring too many people at once?
Have you ever seen a video of like a python who's like killed like a goat, and then they have to like unhinge their jaw and like swallow the goat, and like the goat goes through them for this period of time while they digest it? That's sort of an apocryphal story internally. So we tried to essentially, like, you have to eat the goat sometimes to get to where you want to go to, but at the same time it does cause you some indigestion for a period of time. But yeah, you got to eat the goat.
Right. But what specifically happened, and what could you have done to, besides, getting the goat
I don't know.
to
I don't know. Like, looking back, you're like, oh shit, we should have done this, or we should have done this. But like at the time, the information you've got is imperfect, and you're trying to figure it out as well as you can, while also trying to balance the business. So you try and hire good people, I think, is back to like the people part of it. Like, if you solve that problem, and you've got trustworthy good people who make good decisions, you just need to micromanage them a lot less, and you need to be less rigorous about that kind of stuff. So I think the thing that we need to acknowledge is all of us going through the process are making it up as we go.
Yeah.
I think this varies again by your company, but I think for those of us who sell to big enterprises, in the early days, you're very, very often in a scenario where you're selling an incomplete product, and where the next big customer seismically shifts the course of the business from a revenue and a product and a recruitment perspective. So it's this philosophy that you always only want to have enough powder in the cannon for the next battle, the next customer, because if you have too much powder, then it just sits there, and maybe the sales cycle takes a little bit longer. But what that often means is the early days is that you need to build an organization where the minute you sign that $1 million deal with that investment bank, the organization can be like, oh shit, now we need to hire 50 people. We need to do it in 2 months, and we need to implement this customer at the same time, and we need to shift the roadmap. That's very, very hard for a lot of individual contributors. But for me, that's kind of the secret to not overhiring or not moving too fast. It also is phenomenally difficult to run an organization with that level of agility. But that balance, I think, for me, is the trick to balancing the growth with the investment.
Got it.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
No, I think we definitely had examples in the early days of, in some areas, moving too fast. We grew up in SMB and mid-market, did really well. It was booming. And then we figured, great, let's build a team to go sell in New York and go after the large pharmaceuticals. And what we learned is that actually, even though the product was ready, transforming processes and things that have been going on like for 100 years in GE or a large bank or whatever, doesn't happen overnight. So I think we got ahead of the curve, basically saying, let's build out this awesome enterprise team with 25 great reps and so on, even though we hadn't validated the market was ready. So certainly as we came to Europe, we learned from that and said, let's do what we know works out of the gates, which is SMB mid-market. Let's dip our toe in the water. And after a couple of years into Europe, we started to see, great, there is traction, there's readiness to change even amongst the large global multinationals. So now we start to expand there. So yeah, going back, we certainly made those mistakes, but I hope and I think we learned from them and haven't repeated them as we go to new markets.
Got it. So Jesper, I want to do a follow-up question because you started to go into that of moving up market and how you did it at DocuSign, how you were able to break into those the GE type accounts. and what you could share with the group on that.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've done really well, if you go on the DocuSign website and look at our advisory board, you'll find a pretty long list of high-powered individuals who are either helping us guide the company as an advisory board member, and in many cases, they're individual investors. And we literally put that system into work on a daily basis as we try to sell to large businesses. So if I want to get into, let's say, a large bank in France or whatever, I will call the CEO office saying, please can you figure out amongst our investors, amongst our VC friends, amongst our personal investors and the advisory board, etc., who do we know in this bank in France? How do we get to the CFO or the CEO? And I think what constantly surprises us is how interconnected the world is. So we'll get a call from someone in America who happens to have been on the board of that company, or he shares a board position with the CEO in a different context or whatever. So I think we've used the equity actually at DocuSign pretty intelligently of building almost a network of senior level connectors. And that now that we're putting it to use in sales cycles is like gold dust, because it's just 10 times easier if you get to the CEO and have a conversation opposed to some mid-level manager in a 100,000 person company.
Right. And at Slack, how did you do it? I mean, you get both these products. You get the virality element of it, but how did you then cross over to get that enterprise sale?
It's a work in progress, but we've got terrific traction. 77 of the Fortune 100 companies are Slack paying customers today. So oftentimes that means like a team, a business unit, a work group, anything like that. And then we just work up from there. So one of the approaches we take is many small yeses. So how can we get this team, help make them successful? How can we then translate that success and the value generated into like an adjacent team or a larger adoption? So that's just minimizing risk for our customers, and it's, I think, the right thing for them to do. But it also is the nature of our product that once you start using it, you never stop. And so I think you have to tailor your go-to-market plan for enterprise customers based around the nature of your product.
Got it. So on the last panel, they mentioned, one of the panelists said something about how software being sold today, software as a service, truly is a service, not just like the licensed software where you walk away, everyone pays the money. How important is customer success in building your business, because it is more of the service element?
I think it's huge. I mean, like they're SaaS businesses, right? Almost all the revenue happens after the original net new customer is generated. For us, we want to maintain service levels so that somebody writes in and they get an answer within 2 hours, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We solve their problem on the first transaction most of the time. So that's on the support side of the business, the customer experience side of the business, and the customer success side of the business where you're actually rolling out a large adoption. That sets the tone for the whole actual engagement and the value that you're able to bring to the customer. So if the nature of our product is that it's deeply intertwined with the cultural norms at an organization, at a team level, or the organizational level. And so like, if it's a toxic place, it tends to be like, they kind of don't like Slack because it's like, I kind of don't like work. So there's like this transitive property. So the more that we can do to make them successful in their communication, the more actually we can make them successful at work, full stop.
Got it.
Yeah, on that topic, over the years, we've been debating how do we come up with a set of KPIs that really measures and captures whether we're doing well in terms of driving adoption. And what we ended up with was actually quite smart, I think. We ended up with what we call one key metric, because at DocuSign, if I send you something to sign, I will basically know whether you completed it, yes or no. So there was this aha moment where we basically said the function of all we do in terms of customer satisfaction, enablement, onboarding, all of that good stuff can actually be captured in how many successful transactions are we doing. So what we ended up doing 2 years ago, we basically, everybody, whether you work at reception or you're the CEO, you will have a cash component of your package tied to one key metric, how many successful transactions. And we've gone further now, saying there is an annual equity bonus for everybody if we meet the one key metrics objective. So it doesn't matter actually wherever you are in the organization, you can in one simple graph look at, are we doing well, are we ahead of the curve or behind the curve in terms of driving adoption? And by default, if we do that well, we will have done all of the other stuff in the right way. So that's one way of trying to make it visible and simple to explain to everybody.
I think customer success is probably the most important thing in SaaS businesses, because as James said, for many of us, most of our revenue comes post-sale. So at Move Guides, it is extremely important for 3 reasons. Number one, our accounts grow exponentially once we acquire one of them, and there's some dynamics with our business specifically. So the customer success organization, in many instances, is actually driving a lot of revenue growth within an account. Now, we keep our account executives in the account post-sale for the second reason, which is we have a strong land and expand model. So we want them to be working collaboratively as a team, and then we have some specific profiles that we know work well in that environment from an account executive perspective. The second thing is that in our business in particular, but I think in many businesses that we have, the buyers are your best advocates and they're your best marketing channel. So in global mobility, people go between companies, they all know each other. It's really the best lead generation channel. So every dollar that you invest in customer success has an outcome in terms of new customer acquisition as well. And then unique to our business, international moving is quite emotive. So it's very important for the customers that they know that they have someone that they can rely on if anything goes wrong or if the employee needs some consultation or something like that.
So Jesper's follow-up on that, I thought was really interesting. You highlighted the one key metric that you look at as a business and everybody's compensated on. Brynne or James, do you have a similar type thing in your business where there's sort of 1 or 2 key things that you sort of look at as part of the success of the company and when to kind of keep investing for growth?
Definitely. We don't have one key metric. We have a number of them, and we measure them really kind of week over week in growth. And they are sort of material changes, so like new users, new successful team creation, adoption and upgrade, like those kinds of things. So it's more customer lifecycle driven than one key metric.
We have a series of metrics that we merge into one and compensate pre and post sales and finance and supply chain and other parts of our business on. And the reason for that is that our business and the way that we grow revenue within an account is deeply cross-functional. So if you're working in finance and we're generating revenue in an account from some fees that we manage for payments, or if you're working in our supply chain team and you're managing vendors and we're generating some revenue from the commission from our vendors, or if you're a sales guy and we're generating revenue from subscription fees, we want the team to feel like it's everyone's job to hit the revenue target. Like if you're the AE, you need to understand the float that we have in finance and be able to explain it to the customer. And if you're the finance director, you need to be able to work with the AE and contribute to that account. So we actually have comp plans that align everyone cross-functionally around effectively ARR.
Got it. So one last question. What would be the one thing you would do differently when you look back that you might have said, oh, I wish we would have known that, that you could share with the group here and just that you would have done something else?
Good question. I think we, as I said, we started acquiring a couple of businesses last year, which really filled the holes in sort of taking all the local legal requirements. I think if we knew what we know today, we would have done that earlier. We would have accelerated that because that just opens up the market. It grows by a factor of 8 for us or something like that in Europe. So we would have done that earlier.
Okay, so acquisitions, what about for you?
Hired faster.
Hired faster.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Hired faster, hired sooner, hired more.
Okay.
I think it would have hired more senior earlier.
More senior executives. So
Earlier.
Bring in senior executives earlier. Okay, good. So acquire, hire, and bring in senior people. Awesome. So that's it. We're off to lunch now. Thank you, everyone, for this, listening to this great panel. And that's it.
Thanks.